Hi, I'm Maya, a Gen Z fellow studying chemistry at the University of Oxford, and this is my third video on a series on how to do competitive debating. If you haven't already seen the first two videos, I'd recommend watching them before you watch this one. Thank you. So we talked about the way that a debate is structured and how it's run, so the next part of the video series will be on how this is scored. So the winning team is the team that argued the best and convinced the judge. Judges look for points that are made by a team and not rebutted by the other side. If I made a point about how, because of this economic reason, the motion wouldn't work, and the government side never argue back, then the judge will place my team above the government side because they could not defeat my argument. So this is why rebuttal is really important in your debate speeches, because we say that if anything has been left on the table and not resolved, then it will go to the side who has brought up the point. Teams also get ranked based on how clear their structure is, and a big part of this is sort of labelling your points. So at the start of my speech, I would say, today we're discussing this motion. In my speech, I will talk about three things, X, Y, and Z. And then you talk about them in that order that you mentioned, and as soon as you resolve point X, then you say, moving on to point Y, and then talk about them in order. It should be very, very obvious to the judge what you are going to discuss, because the judge will be having to jot down very quick notes on everything you are saying, and if they don't write down that you've said a point, then you cannot get credited for the point when they're trying to review the debate as a whole. And it's very, very easy to go off on a tangent, so it's important to plan your speech and write some clear notes in your 15-minute prep time and think of really what you're going to say and how you're going to say it. It's very easy to stutter or pause. You will not get criticised or condemned for doing that, but it is very important to not start a sentence without knowing where you're going with it, and that can really be resolved by planning. Lots of people prefer to use flashcards rather than whole bits of paper, because that can be easy to say your whole point on your whole flashcard and then discard the flashcard once you are done with it. Now moving on to a bit that people find especially fun in competitive debating, POIs. POIs are points of information. This is where you're actually allowed to interrupt a debate. This is how it becomes more engaging and more competitive. You can't hop up in the middle of someone's speech and say, I think you're completely wrong, and go on a 5-minute tangent, because that's simply not fair when they only have 5 minutes to be making this speech. So POIs are a very formal way of doing this, where you have 15 seconds to stand up and interrupt someone's speech by making a short and snappy question to them. So you're not allowed to insult them, you're not allowed to be rude, you've got to be very concise and to the point. So people do not have to take your POI. You will stand up, you will say POI, and if they wish to, they can say, go on then, and they're allowed to get to the end of their sentence or the end of the point before choosing to accept you, and you just have to stand there waiting until they're ready to take you. If they know for a fact that they don't want to take your POI, they can wave you down and you will have to sit down, and you can try again to POI in about a minute's time. You can't keep shouting POI if they're refusing to take you, because that can be considered to be disruptive. So in your POI, I recommend writing down exactly what you want to say so you can use your time effectively. And you want to make your point as short and snappy as possible, because if you go on a long, rambly POI, then they can be thinking about how they might want to respond to that while you're still speaking, and that can actually give them an advantage. Taking a POI is very, very scary, because you have no idea what the person is going to say to you, and you really have to think on your feet. But judges really like it if you can show that you have that skill. So I would always recommend taking a POI or two in your speech if they have been offered, because it shows that you know your argument so well and trust yourself to actually give a good and measured response to whatever the opposite team might throw at you. And it can also bring out some really interesting points of the debate and allow you to respond to material that you might not have otherwise said. It's also very important to make lots of POIs if you happen to give your speech in the first half of the debate, because if you are the first speaker, then the debate continues for an extra 35 minutes after you've already spoken, and you really don't want to be forgotten in that time. You want to make sure that your presence is still felt and that you're still considered by the judge to be engaging quite a lot with the later speakers in the later part of the debate. You're not allowed to give POIs in the first or last minute of the speech, because the first minute is there for the speaker to set up their argument and really get going with that, and the last minute is for them to wrap up their debate and finish what they were saying. So these minutes are called protected time, and a gavel or a bell or a knock will tell you when you are allowed to POI. Classically, after the first minute of a speech, you'll hear a single knock, which signals that you're allowed to POI, and at the 4th minute you hear another knock, and then at the 5th minute when the speech is over, you'll hear a double knock or a double tap, anything like that to show that the speech is done. It's very important to not overgo your speech length, and if you're still talking after 5 minutes and 10 seconds, then the judge will start to get very annoyed and just start banging continuously until you finish your sentence. So that's how debating is scored, and that's how you give a POI, and that sums up my debating series. And I think that the best thing for you guys to do is to start trying to debate and trying to find people to argue with, and ideally get 8 people in a room and try and form this competitive debating style and see how you get on. Thank you very much.